Yeah. We are rolling. So without further ado, Ed, would you come on up? And would you just give a little background? You could just give a little background.
Sure.
You have, I don't know, like
10.
3 minutes?
Right, we're gonna whip right through this.
Yeah.
Okay. Give me the,
Okay.
hi, Ed Solomon, here for a long time. And was around in the early days of the watershed group, work with Holly and stuff, circle back every once in a while. But I really appreciated the talks last week and really kind of set the stage for the changing climate and what that means for the valley. And I want to go a little deeper into water supply issues around climate change. So I've got about 10 slides. Feel free to interrupt me if you have questions, and we'll just move through them. So next slide, please.
You got, oh, sorry. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so if I wanted to start with, and this is something I take to talk about in the last presentation, some of the basin specific studies that we're using to look at changes in water supply, and just talk about some of the nuts and bolts, changes in air temperature, precipitation, snowpack, and then glacial melts and the extent of glaciers, and then bring that down to expected changes in stream flow, and then kind of tie that back to the conservation strategy. So we're really lucky that we live in a place where scientists come and hang out and do really important work that we can leverage to do, more mundane management level stuff. And in terms of studies that we've been using and work I've been involved with back in 2010, the Nolan study from State University, they did some of the quantification of the contribution of glacial melt to our water supply. In 2014, the county and the Bureau of Reclamation conducted a Hood River Basin study. They brought in a coupled glacial melts and watershed hydrology model to predict changes in water supply based on the CMIP-3 model, the coupled model into comparison projects, an ensemble of climate change models that they ran to come up with changes in stream flow based on kind of the state of the art at the time. Moving forward in time, Franz et al., there's a few studies that were done where they basically built on that original Hood River Basin study model, introduced some of the more newer climate models, and evaluated changes in stream flow based on two emissions scenarios: the RCP 4.5, which is just a moderate projection of future greenhouse gas emissions, and then RCP 8.5, which is kind of the high end of what we see for future greenhouse gas emissions. So those are the underlying studies that I'm using to come up with some of these things here. So looking first at temperature and precipitation, and Dick, talked about this in his presentation last week. What I'm showing here in the upper right graph is projected changes in annual air temperature. And these are percent changes compared to a base period of time, which is 1960 to 2010. So the black line is the base period, and then the two red and green lines are the projected future temperatures under these two different emission scenarios. And what we've seen, I mean, being in 2025 right now, we've from the things I've seen, we've actually seen a quantified about a degree increase in annual air temperatures. So we are on track. Which of those two tracks we're on, or a worse one, or maybe a better one, we really don't know. But that's what we're currently looking at in changes in temperature. And temperature is the big driver of water supply changes in the basin here. The lower graph is changes in precipitation. So this is compared to 100% is the black line there. That's for the base period, the historic period. And then we're looking at projected increases in precipitation on an annual basis. And that seems like good news, but it really isn't, because most of those increases occur in the winter months under a warmer climate. So we have less storage and snowpack. So anyways, overall, we're looking at, we've experienced about a 1 degree temperature increase to date. And we're looking at something like an additional 2 or 3 degrees Celsius increase in air temperatures, which are driving a lot of the processes here. You can go to the second bit of this slide. This is some plots of snowpack. The black line is excuse me, the current condition, and this is just for an example location. This is in the vicinity of Lawrence Lake at about 5,000 feet elevation. And what I'm showing here is the green line is for the, I can't even read what year that is, but it's okay. So that's the projected changes from the historic period for that particular time period. The yellow line is another 30 years out in time, and then the red line is kind of at the end of the current century. So, and again, the top graph is for the more moderate emission scenario, and the bottom one is for the more extreme emissions. But basically, it's bad news for snowpack. You know, a lot of the water that's used in the summertime is currently stored in snowpack, and you know what we're projecting is significant decreases in snowpack going forward. This next one looks at glacial area, and again, this is stuff that Dick had talked about last time. You know, what we're seeing under these two different emission scenarios, though, are pretty extreme loss of glacial area down to you know, 10 to 30% of the historic area of glaciers in the basin.
Question.
Yeah.
What would you attribute to fall before the industrial age in 1920 to 1940? Why was it decreasing so rapidly before climate change became so prevalent?
Well, I mean, I think that we would have been experiencing, you know, the effects of greenhouse gas emissions for, you know, for quite some time. There's also kind of natural, you know, variability in climate cycles too. So, you know, that's why you see some of that up and down. Dick, you might have something to add on that?
Well, it's also the case, note that the so-called Little Ice Age lasted into the late 1800s. And so chances are there was still a residual effect from that Little Ice Age, which caused an advance of glaciers throughout the northern hemisphere.
So getting into more of the water supply, this is looking at September, for the month of September, glacial melts. Again, these are projections over till the end of the century under the two different emission scenarios. But again, you know, we're looking at something like 10 to 30% of our current glacial melt as being part of our September, you know, stream flow portfolio, if you think of it that way. So again, you know, significant decreases. Okay, so this is a busy graph. I'm going to pause here for a bit. So this kind of sums up conditions around the watershed. The top set of graphs are for that more moderate emission scenario, greenhouse gas emissions. Bottom are for the more extreme. And these are time period from 1900 to the end of this century. And the blue line is the total stream flow in the month of, this is for the period of July through September. And green down at the bottom is the glacial contribution to that total. Okay, so the green is part of the blue. And kind of the big take home here is that where you are in the basin has a lot to do with, what your future water supply is needed. But if you look at the graph on the far right, for Elliott Creek, that's up on the north side of Mount Hood. It's probably the largest portion of glacial meltwater contributing to annual stream flow. What we're looking at is, those are the most dire projections in terms of decrease. Looking at about 20%. If you're in the West Fork, which is the middle graph, or left of the middle, there's essentially no glacial contribution. So there's certainly projected decreases in water supply over time, but the amount that is projected to decrease is a lot less. So kind of bringing it all into kind of an annual hydrograph. This is for the Hood River down at Tucker Bridge. And on the left, what I'm showing is median monthly discharge. Black line again is current condition. That's actually observed values. And then the yellow and red are out in time for the kind of mid-century and late century projections for monthly stream flows. So, this kind of integrates all of the graph from the previous page. So this is kind of a big picture, lowering the basin. And, what you see here is a significant shift in stream flow from the spring month into the winter. So, with the rising air temperatures, and what this is showing is a shift in the annual hydrograph. And most of the runoff will be earlier in winter months and early spring. Whereas now, conditions linger, or stream flow, snow melt, stream flow, continue at higher rates. Obviously, the graph on the right is showing the change. So it's showing the change in monthly. And what you're seeing is in irrigation season in June, July, August, September, pretty significant reductions. So that's kind of the big take-home picture for all of the different factors. We're trying to bring it down to the conservation goals that the watershed group has. So the first three columns on the left, those are taken straight out of a strategic action plan. And these are looking at the total potential saving that different actions might produce. The second column there is total, and the third column looks like so we're looking at something. If we implement a lot of the water saving things, we might see savings something on the order of 80. In the next columns, I've just summarized from the last graph the deficit likely to see based on change climate conditions. So in kind of in the short term, maybe we're able to implement these water conservation measures, we might balance out what will likely be lost due to climate change. Over the longer term and under a work emission scenario, we might be falling short of that. So not a lot of happiness in that. Yeah.
What percent?
Percent of
How significant is 66?
If that's CFS, I don't know.
Yeah.
So go back and here. So the graphs on the right are summarizing, the changes, right? So hard to kind of see it, but the scale on this lower right one goes from minus. So, we're looking at in, let's say like the month of July, where we have
Next slide shows if you implement it on the number of conservation measures, you come up with less than 7%.
yeah, back here. That's right. Let's see. And I think what you asked so was what, how does that deficit not the graphs on the left here show that, excuse me, like for example, in the month of June, on average, the median flow, right? So, pretty significant reduction.
Sorry, newbie here, but I don't understand how you have negative cubic feet per second.
It's just the difference between what is currently experienced in those months and what is projected to be what's on each. So it's a reduction. Yeah. It's still positive.
November's not running
Any questions about this? I think we have one.
The residential water conservation, what, is there like more, a little bit more detail, like specifically what that is?
Oh, yeah, there's a whole.
It's out, yeah, it's out for irrigation.
Beyond farm irrigation of 3%. That is listed as percent use reduction, but do you know what it is about? Does anyone?
Oh, how much of the total use would you say?
It's from, it's like sort of current use, 20% reduction in current use. And we kind of look at, are you talking residential water conservation? Yep. And so what was the question then for the farmland? So that represents about like a 40% savings, 40 to 50% savings in. Well, it's more, it is, I mean, so, but for the transition from, and Felipe can, talk to this, speak to this as well, but the transition from sort of like conventional farm irrigation to high efficiency farm irrigation saves in this basin, there's been a number of studies, and it saves anywhere from 40 to 60% of irrigation. So it's huge. And that's why you see such a big, like residential water conservation is kind of small compared to, ag uses much more water everywhere,
So what I haven't seen yet is whether or not there's any impact to fish habitat. Is it going to push it to lower altitude or?
Well, that's a whole nother.
It's a whole nother talk.
Whole nother conversation, yes, but, yeah, I mean, in general, the preferred, temperature ranges, will be going up in elevation, if you will, if you think about it as, I'm a fish, I want this temperature, I find it here today, 10 years from now, I'm gonna have to higher elevation, if I can.
I understand that, but what I'm getting to interconnectivity of the. Are they still going to be able to navigate as far as they do today in elevation?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that the stream flow changes that we're likely to see are going to, make it where it's not passable. But I think there'll be less habitat, and habitat is, directly related to the quantity of water.
Last two columns, and is it supposed to be.
This is a typo, this was the English.
Yeah, the one on the right is the word stream. Emissions. So, oh yeah, so I put this map on the first slide and did talk about it now. It's kind of a nice graphic. What this shows is the percent of the stream discharge that is glacial melt. It's on an annual basis. So, what you see is streams like Cone and Elliott, which are coming directly off the glaciers, have about 2/3 of the flow within the green system is directly glacial. You're in the West Fork, which we talked about, is very little glacial. And the white circles that I showed there are essentially what I think of as kind of a primary irrigation version. So middle fork is those three that are clustered in the heavily glaciated streams in the middle fork. And again, those are the sources that are likely to be changing, particularly in summertime irrigation over time. Over on the east fork, the single big fork irrigation version. Also a glacial stream, not a much lower portion. But obviously everything downstream. So in summary, I think we're fortunate to have we're able to leverage a lot of good science out there. As I said, the model increase in air temperature has about 1 degree has been, that was what was predicted when this model was done in the early 2000s, and we've seen that in 2025. And we're looking at possible additional 2 to 3 degrees increase this year. As I said, there's some modest increases in precipitation, but unfortunately, the summertime supply is diminished or projected to be diminished. Where we will likely see a significant loss of storage and glaciers and snowpack. The one thing that I didn't add into this discussion is that if we continue to grow the same crops that we currently grow, we're likely to see an increase in demand for those crops as temperatures increase and they use more water. Plus, we're likely to see a decrease in summertime precipitation as well. So kind of a double win there. And as an example, for middle fork irrigation district, they're likely to see an increase of about 8 CFS average over the irrigation season with the same crop mix. And what you grow on your farm, individual decision, right? But I think it's kind of like if you it's like insurance adjustment. They believe in climate change. They adjust their rates accordingly. And I think every farmer makes individual decisions about how to acquire the water they use, apply it. I would imagine that over time these things play a shift in the drier, less water use crops. There's little storage right now in the basin. Lawrence Lake on Middle Fork, and then Farm Irrigation District has the Kingsley reservoirs. And I'm not making a plug for more storage, but I remember being at one of these meetings and someone saying, "What? There's only some way we capture that water that's melting in the winter, and how to build it." I think that there's a need to think about additional storage, as time goes on for the agricultural economy. And I will say a shout out to Farmers Irrigation District. Their Kingsley Reservoir is a big it's in a headwater position, it really doesn't have any additional stream upstream of water transfer from adjacent basin. In terms of impact on fish, and probably a neutral or positive impact. Let's say, as I said, there's a variable response across the watershed. Irrigation districts that have been enjoying a good steady supply of glacial consumed water may be impacted more. And as we talked about conservation measures, they provide some mitigation to I think that's it.
All right. So, so those of you who were here for our last month's meeting might recall me showing data indicating that thus far here, at least within the Hood River Valley and probably elsewhere within the Columbia Gorge, so far we've gotten off pretty lucky with respect to climate change compared to the world at large. In fact, the increase in temperature relative to a baseline prior to 1980 here locally has only been about half of the global average. So if things don't seem so bad around here, you don't need to go very far before you find places where they're a lot worse. And that's particularly true if you go north, up into the Arctic and subarctic, where the warming has already been as much as 6 degrees Celsius. So that's pretty extreme. So my talk tonight will be brief, and it has to do with measures that we can take as individuals to try to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions and thereby perhaps help mitigate climate change. So first, I just wanted to show a couple slides showing sort of where we stand right now with how we're doing in this country with regard to our greenhouse gas emissions. And what this shows is that we peaked in 2007. It started going down after that, partly because of the financial crash of 2008. Remember the housing bubble and the whole economy tanked and just everything sort of decrepitated a little bit from a financial standpoint. And that in turn resulted in burning less fossil fuel. And so our emissions started to go down. And they generally tended to go down somewhat since that time, but most recently they've started to level off again. Aside from the COVID dip that appeared back in 2020, especially, and that again was due to financial activity. And of course, there was a lot less driving going on. People quit commuting to work, for example. This shows, this is another slide I got from the EPA website, and it shows the sources of greenhouse gases emitted within the United States. And there's just a subtle difference between the pie chart on the left and the one on the right. On the left, it shows kind of the most general representation of the sources. Whereas on the right, it's taken the electrical power generation part of the source and moved that over into those parts of consumption of electricity that are actually generating that much greenhouse gas. And so what it shows, if you focus on the one on the right, is that the transportation and residential and commercial sectors are more than half, responsible for more than half the greenhouse gas emissions in this country. And so that in turn, indicates that there are probably opportunities for affecting change there. So what I'm going to show you next are the results from this particular study, which is a very large study compiling data from many different sources. In fact, this group looked at 7,000 different publications to try to develop statistical information about what mitigation measures are actually most effective, focusing on those that individuals can take rather than those that, say, for example, countries can take. Obviously, actions that governments can take on a national scale can be much, much more effective than anything that an individual can do. But nonetheless, it's worth trying to do our part as individuals as well. So the first one is one that is not easy at all for most of us living here in the gorge, which is to live car-free. Obviously, if you live in an urban center, even somewhere in or near downtown Portland, that becomes a lot easier to do. There's a lot more public transit available. But for many of us living here in the gorge, it's pretty darn difficult to imagine our lives being totally without the use of a car. So if driving is necessary, then the next best thing you can do is to use an EV, or if not that, at least a gas electric hybrid. I will put one caveat on this, however, and that's that people often think of EVs as being completely clean energy from the standpoint of not releasing greenhouse gases. However, for those of us who live in or right around Hood River and get our grid electrical power from Pacific Power, it's worth keeping in mind that Pacific Power, 56% of the energy that it sends to Oregon is coming from coal burning plants in Wyoming and Utah. So although we may not see that coal burning taking place locally here, it is happening. And that's where an awful lot of our electricity is coming from. So it's not really correct. If you're charging your EV in or right near Hood River from Pacific Power grid power, it's not clean energy. So that's an important caveat, I think. This is another one that's going to be unpopular with a lot of people. Cut airline travel to a minimum. I went through an exercise about 6 years ago of trying to figure out just exactly what my personal share was of carbon emissions from flying in a jet plane, some considerable distance. And what I learned after I was able to find the necessary data on the US Department of Energy website, did some simple calculations, and basically came to the conclusion that my personal share of carbon emissions from flying on a commercial jet, a fully loaded commercial jet, was about the same as me driving individually in my Prius, which got about 45 miles to the gallon. Now, a lot of us would probably think twice about taking a solo road trip across country, say from here to the East Coast, even in a car that gets 45 miles per gallon. But many people think nothing of flying that distance in a jet. And the fact is their personal share of carbon emissions is immense. And collectively, if as a society we could cut back considerably on our jet airline travel, that would really do a lot for reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. This one is probably kind of a no-brainer. Produce and use renewable electricity if you can. For most of us who are homeowners, the most straightforward way to do that is to install solar panels. And solar panels are incredibly efficient. They've become better as time has gone on. At my house, I have solar panels on my roof, and it basically generates all the electricity I need. In fact, I generate an excess of electricity off my solar panels. Of course, wind energy is very important and is increasingly important in places like Oregon with its high potential for generating electricity that way. And of course, we also have an abundance of renewable electricity from our hydropower system. However, again, a curiosity is that Pacific Power, for those of us who get our electricity or grid electricity from Pacific Power, it gets nothing from the Bonneville Power Administration. It's all coming from other sources. And so very little of the power that Pacific Power is providing us with is actually clean, renewable electricity. That's not true of some of the other power companies here in the gorge. They do get Bonneville Power. Finally, another unpopular suggestion, eat a vegan diet. And, you know, I would have a real hard time doing this myself, but there is a way to kind of do it part way, which is simply cut back on the amount of red meat that you eat, cut back on the use of dairy products. The thing about cattle is that compared to other kinds of livestock, they use a lot more resources to produce a pound of meat, certainly compared to, well, certainly considerably more than with pork, considerably more than with poultry. And of course, they also emit a heck of a lot of methane. You know, cows fart a lot. That's what it amounts to. And methane is a very, very potent greenhouse gas. And this one's a no-brainer too. If you have the opportunity and the means to do it, if you can increase the thermal efficiency of your house, that's a great way to save energy as well. And that's it. Those are the leading 6 suggestions that came out of that very comprehensive study that I mentioned. And if you want to learn more about that study, you can easily find that paper online. If you just, in fact, I did a test Google search today. If you simply Google the author's name, Ivanova, climate change mitigation, it will lead you straight to this paper, and it's freely downloadable. It's not a paper that we have to go through. So I recommend looking at it because it has many other suggestions in addition to these 6 leading suggestions that I mentioned. And that's it.
So, I can't. I don't think you need to worry about that.
I'm just gonna.
Okay,
Yeah, show
so
and
we're gonna,
tell.
so the questions, we're gonna let it roll, the recording. Yep, and would you introduce yourself, give a little background?
Yes, hi everyone. Hey, my name is Felipe Mendez. I own On-Site Supply House. I've been in Hood River for about 25 years now. Started working in this industry since 2002. I come from a family of farmers down in Mexico too. We used to grow corn, beans, and my dad is also an agronomist, graduated from the University of Colima. And we had 3 different businesses down in Mexico. One of them was helping him sell pesticides, herbicides, hybrid seed to produce corn. We had 2 chicken rotisseries also. And we decided to migrate in 2000, and we love it here. We decided to stay. I guess my passion for this industry, that's what it kind of led me back, because I was working in different industries, and somehow I ended up with irrigation and farming again, right? Well, at least helping farmers. So anyway, whoever doesn't know me, probably, I see a lot of people here that I know. Anyway, I'm not a very good speaker, public speaker, okay, so you can tell. But once I get going now, you won't stop. So I guess what I can, for as much as this means, irrigation is a big part in our area, right? And we face a lot of struggles also, trying to conserve water, because I can speak for most of the farmers around here that their biggest challenge is water quality, irrigation water quality. Trust me, my job is also an irrigation designer, right? So my job and also my goal as a designer is to help the growers produce the most, and use their water efficiently to create or get a better crop, But there's, like I said, there's a lot of challenges, right? And one of them being there's the amount of silt in the water. I don't know how many of you guys are with, or irrigate with, like East Fork Water, Farmers Water, or Middle Fork. That, it's just part of nature, I guess, right? But we encourage a lot of our customers to switch from their, traditional irrigation systems. Speaking from the well, let me stick to the farmers first, sorry. So I help, and I work closely with the NRCS, also with the Hood River Soil Water Conservation District, I get it right. We work closely, on trying to use the water more efficiently. What that means is that we really need to start from scratch and start using new technology. There's a lot of companies out there that are developing, more efficient irrigation emission devices, right? I wish I could say that the whole world would change the drip and we'll solve the problem. Well, it's not possible, right? But in other areas, it still works, right? It does the job, but specifically in our area here, for instance, pear growers, cherry growers, they have such a short window to get the irrigation done, right? That we need to look at precipitation rates, evapotranspiration rates, and try to meet somewhere in the middle so they can get the job done. And also, just not to mention the shortage of help, or laborers that they're facing, or they have been facing for the last 6 years or so. That also has a lot of impact in the water usage because, let's say they have a 12-hour set, designated for this area, and their guy forgets, or simply they just don't have the people to run the irrigation efficiently. So I guess with this being said, trying to, irrigate, or from our perspective, as designers or suppliers, we can help in that area, right? And we can help you meet, your evapotranspiration rates, your precipitation rates, based on your water allowance or your water window that you have. But at the end, it comes down to practice, I will say. Nowadays, we're helping with the help of, I don't know if you guys know of this company called Nielsen Irrigation or heard of. They're based out of Walla Walla, Washington. I don't know, but I wear it proudly because those guys really pride themselves on making good quality equipment for irrigation. And it's also made locally, Yeah, it's not the cheapest, let's be honest, right? But you're getting quality, and also you're supporting local economies. So what I was going with this is that automation is also a big part of this, especially with the new challenges the growers are facing with the shortage of people. That is another way that we can help them, mitigate or just use the water more efficiently. I guess there's slogan goes, Nielsen Irrigation helps you do this and irrigate better, do a better job of irrigation, right? So I kind of stand by that principle. I don't know how many of you guys, again, if you guys have irrigation water, they have faced the challenge of, you're gonna start your garden, let's say, for instance, say, oh, I'm ready to do my irrigation. Where you go to the local stores and say, okay, I want to do this. But then, for instance, you come to us and I can say, well, I have a drip system that you can use. But my first question will be, well, what are you watering from? Are you using city water or are you using irrigation water, right? Well, I can tell you like 90% of our customers use irrigation water. Well, we recommend filtration. We can tell you many times or enough times, say, hey, you need to put a filter in your system. They do it, but they sometimes taking it apart, they take it out because they need to be cleaning it more often, or, it's just not working out for them. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that we encourage people to go and try to save water, right? By going with drip systems. Again, it's a challenge. It's doable, but it just takes a little bit more work. If you really want to conserve water, consider using this. Now, when we do residential irrigation systems to keep our lawns green, I don't know if you guys heard of or know that there's a new, what do you call it, law or mandate or from the state government. It kicked in last year to where any pop-up head, especially like the spray heads, I like to do this, the ones that go, they pop up and go like that. So those type of devices have to have a pressure reducing device now by law. So let's say somebody shows up to my shop and say, hey, state comes up and looks at my sprinklers and I don't have the pressure reducing ones. Well, I can get fined. But that is another way for us to save water. Because, back in the day, and I can still say, I used to believe that by having a lot of pressure come into my system, I don't need as many sprinklers because I can reach farther, right? Yeah, it does that. But reality is, if you pay attention to that sprinkler, how much water is just getting volatile, they just flies away. So it's a lot of misting. So that's water it hasn't been applied, it's not being used, so it's waste of water. So also, we encourage people to use I didn't bring one of those in, but it's literally like this device inside of a pop-up head. It helps, minimize the waste of water, right? Now, on irrigation systems like a drip system, you do need to put a pressure reducer, right? Because two things, the tubing, this poly tubing is rated for 50 psi, which a lot of people might have a little bit over that pressure, but when it's sitting out in the sun, right, it can get hot and then gets hit with high pressure, so it bursts and it can, rupture and you're wasting water. So we encourage our customers or anybody out there to use pressure regulators. Then it also, a drip system literally works, it can work with as little as 10 pounds for long distances. We also offer, and we have implemented different, with different farmers, especially row crops. Have you guys heard about drip tape? So drip tape is basically the same thing, with like tubing that lays flat, like a fire hose, literally, but smaller diameter. It has emitters every so often, they start from 6-inch, 8-inch, 12-inch, and so on. That type of irrigation device, it can work with as little as 5 pounds. And you can irrigate long distances. So again, if we have the mentality that by having or not having enough pressure, we can't irrigate, well, it's not true. It's doable. We just have to really, do our research or come talk to us, and we can also, we can always help you get the job done. What else? I have some devices here that I can show you. I don't know about misters. Could that be something that? Greenhouses, use misters. These guys use very little water. But yeah.
What about the new the new Nelson one you were telling me? Oh, forgot that. Well, but just tell us what it is.
Yeah, so Nelson Irrigation back in 2003, and again, I'm not getting paid by them, okay? I just tell you that it's a very successful company that they do a really good job. So they developed this sprinkler head that goes into a pop-up head, it's a nozzle basically. That you've seen those rainbow heads that just, again, they spray like a fan. Well, the water usage, it can range from as little as 1 gallon a minute up to 6 gallons a minute per nozzle. So when I see some places, not just here, I go to Portland and places like that, I see those sprinklers up there, and then I see them like every 4 feet, every 3 feet. It's like, whoa, that's a lot of water, right? Well, Nelson Irrigation took initiative on, developing a device that was going to save water. They really did it. So their sprinkler head became a 1/4 gallon a minute, reaching as far as 25 feet. Right? So you have really good coverage and good uniformity, which us as designers, we look at uniformity and, efficiency in gallons per minute and such. But what we were impressed is the amount of heads that you were needing to complete a job versus a rainbow head. You cut it by half or more. Yes, especially here in the gorge, sometimes you have to question where you're using this type of heads because the wind, right? This sprinkler kind of like waters like this, as fingers that go around like this. And they're very thin. The precipitation rates are really low also. But if you water that was another thing in the scheduling that I can talk about a little bit more. They actually became or they developed this device that it can actually save water, and you can cover a lot of ground, and they're being super successful. They sold that branch of their business to Hunter Irrigation, which is in the landscape industry. They're like the monsters of, of all the manufacturers. So, I mean, that tells you that it's a really good product, and we've been selling it for the last 10 years. Well, I mean, since, that year, but in my business, I mean, I try to bring in some other heads that say that we're gonna do the same kind of work, and it didn't. So people work, I mean, they still come in and buy the same head because they know it works, right? And it saves water. I guess my last comment, unless you guys have questions or anything, scheduling. I don't know if you guys are big believers of watering at night. Lots of people, I see sprinklers turn on in the middle of the day when it's super hot. You're actually wasting water. If you're practicing your irrigation that way. I know there's places that they have such a short irrigation window that they have no choice, right? Especially places they're like a community, they have a master valve and they're where you have this many hours to get your irrigation done. So that's the only places I've seen it, but I will encourage you guys to start, if we want to save water, to irrigate at night or as late as possible that we can, or maybe really early in the morning. It is more beneficial actually for either your grass or crops. Yeah, I mean, that's the other thing. I have a couple of samples here of just, emitters. Would you guys want to see them? Or you guys gonna come up?
Yeah, but people can come up after.
Yeah, okay, so, emitters, or drippers, they call them. I mean, they range from half a gallon an hour up to 2 or 4 gallons per hour. So, again, you can, your plant requires 4 gallons or 2 gallons. I mean, you have a way to get it done, right? You're not having to spend a fortune also. Drip is very inexpensive compared to the old brass impact sprinklers, They're now like $20 a piece, just brass. So I have some timers here that you can utilize, also, especially if you want to water at night or very early in the morning, you can always rely on one of these timers, A lot of our small growers use those. Now the farmers, cherry farmers and pear farmers, they have a lot of acreage. They're implementing another system from Nelson Irrigation, which is called a Twig. And they literally have a app-based software that connects via, well, it's internet first, but then it becomes a satellite or radio transmission, without, when it's out in the field. And it's, it's helping them also, thing is becoming available with moisture sensor, which is also another thing that you could integrate, but I don't know much about those. All I know is how to, test moisture just by touch or just by looking at the ground, but they are also, working on that. We also have the, we call this 18 millimeter or half-inch poly tubing with emitters I think this one, the closest they come is 12 inches apart. And they only make them in a range of half a gallon per hour per emitter or 1 gallon. This works great if your soil is flat. If you're using it on a slope field, we can help you. Especially if it's hanging. I would not recommend it unless you're using a clip, because gravity has a tendency to pull on anything, right? So water slips away from where you want it to, land. So, but for that, we use this instead, right? We plug them in and then the droplet goes right where we want it. But this for applications where, it's gonna be on the ground or it's gonna be flat, even on a slope, but if it's, as long as it's on the ground, it will still work just fine. And again, you can run this with as little as 10 PSI. You don't have to spend a ton of money, and you can irrigate your crops, or you can do subsurface irrigation for your grass. I would not recommend it much, stick with those MP rotators. Well, any questions, Sophia? Yes.
Just for a gardener, a homeowner, what percentage savings in water is there between sprinklers versus just drip?
Wow, that's a huge savings. I will tell you about 90% savings. Because you are not, especially if you're using spray heads, right? Versus a drip. I mean, literally 90% of savings in water.
And I would assume it's better for the plant too, to have the water go into the soil and not hit the plant. Like,
Well, yes, and also, I'm glad that you mentioned this, but how many of you guys go out there and weed out by hand because you're broadcasting water in places where you don't want it? Well, if you use drip, you're only watering the, plants or bushes or trees, whatever, that you need water. And you don't spend any time weeding out, or pulling out weeds that, well, I got this big field that I needed to water, just this plant, but because I was using a sprinkler head, now I have to go there and weed out the whole area. So there's their pros and cons, again. But you guys got any questions? You know where to find me? I can help you there, Yes, go ahead.
I mean, my filters all the time, they're dirty, but
Yes.
season I noticed that things were struggling, and I started pulling it up and found a lot of the nozzles were.
Yes. Oh. There is, again, we're fighting silt, which is a very rare, I don't know if you call it mineral or just sand. Yeah, it's super soft, is light, and it can compact, it can get hard. It's really hard to, filter the water. But one of the things that we try to share with our customers, growers, and everybody else is, if you're doing drip irrigation, not just by having this filter is going to save your problem, right? We also encourage our customers to do what is called the flushing game. You have to open the ends of those lines every so often and flush all the debris that makes its way through the filter, because it's always gonna go to the end of the line and it starts working its way back. So if you flush your lines often, you can get rid of most of that debris.
Define often.
Yeah, that's a tough one. Yes.
But it really is.
Yes.
If you're flushing, it doesn't just force it into the.
No, no, it'll go out the end of the hose. So again, if your system, see, this is where it gets kind of tricky, because I just said that with 10 PSI, you can irrigate, right? Well, I lied a little bit. You do need at least 15 PSI. Sorry, go ahead, Ben. Oh, there you go. Thank you. We need to have the extra little, bit of pressure to help do the flushing, push that out of the hose, right? Yeah, 10 PSI works, it's static. But if we can get a boost, if you can close some lines and build the pressure up, at least two pounds will make a lot of difference. But flushing the lines helps a lot with that specific problem. Because I've talked to growers, they have drip irrigation to start their trees and they keep irrigating. So I go there and say, well, I just put this on like 5 years ago and it's not working already. All good. First thing I do, I go to the end. Chunks of mud just go out like chocolate, comes out. Did you guys ever flush this? Well, we're supposed to. Yes, yeah, it's, we also sell now, we brought in, and I can proudly say that I was the one that brought those self-cleaning filters into Hood River. And we have sold a lot of them. Our customers are happy with them, but the only problem is that because they self-flush, people think that they're maintenance free. So they forget to clean them, do a maintenance check maybe once a month, for our busiest year, let's say July, August. Months, our busiest months. And they call and say, well, the filter's flushing all the time. I've been cleaning it up. Well, wasn't it supposed to clean itself? Well, yeah, but when you go to, you get in your car, you turn it on, runs out of gas, right? Or it needs maintenance at some point too. So, same with any irrigation system, it needs maintenance, it needs attention, so. But, yeah.
Thank you, Felipe.